This is KAZU, Pacific Grove, Monterey Bay Public Radio. The views expressed here are those of myself and do not necessarily reflect the views of Kazoo staff or board of directors, myself being Mae Brussell. My name is Mae Brussell. This Hour of World Watchers is made possible in part by Aries Arts in the heart of Capitola Village, serving Santa Cruz's growing consciousness for over 20 years. World Watchers has been an ongoing program for 17 years. It will be 17 years this June, the end of May, that I've been on the air, and some of you are new listeners every week. So I welcome you to listening. Some of you have just listened a few weeks. I get telephone calls and letters. The people that like it get in touch with me, a lot of them, and I appreciate getting, contact with you. And if names are new and go pretty fast, hang in there because you'll get the lingo. You won't remember all the names that I put on in an hour, but what I'm trying to do is to make the connection of these people through various dates in history that are important to events that affect our lives, and you can get an overview of what I'm saying. And if you have a tape recorder, tape it and play it back, listen again. And if you send a self-addressed stamped envelope, I'll send you the bibliography for the particular evening you heard, or write to me once a month and put the numbers on the envelope that you want the bibliography sheet for. When I begin the programs, I number them and date them. This is World Watchers number 846, and is February the 22nd, 1988. The first item I want to mention is that the Presidio trial in San Francisco that I've been following since last May has right now been closed down. There are no witnesses. They've been removed from the trial. The children, 60 molestation cases, are going to let Mr. Gary Hambright and Lieutenant Colonel Michael Aquino, for all purposes, go free. There will be no case against these particular people. The San Jose Mercury had a story that the only remaining child who was to have testified against the alleged molester was removed from the case. The U.S. Attorney's Office may or may not bring new charges. They haven't said. The problem was that the accused now will go free because the prosecution had a very weak case. They didn't want to put in the more bizarre details, which in fact were true, but didn't want to bring it in because they didn't believe the jury would believe the stories. Right now, what is truth is what is believable, I guess. Not that the jury can't grow up or watch Oprah Winfrey or Geraldo Rivera or other television shows or read news accounts of these very events and circumstances happening to children everywhere else. But the jury in San Francisco at an Army trial wouldn't believe what the children said, that many were made to eat feces, they drank urine, they drank blood in rituals, they saw adults dressed in costumes, they described ritual abuse that took place to them, and a lot of this was conducted at the home of a high-ranking Army officer who founded a satanic church. That's Officer Lieutenant Colonel Michael Aquino. He was on Oprah Winfrey's program with his wife this past week, and another woman was there who was adopted as a breeder when she was a young child by people into the satanic cult, and 2 of her 3 children were used for snuff movies and murdered, and the 3rd was killed in satanic ritual. Before she could get out of the satanic parents that had adopted her and out of these rituals, she had become a breeder, and I've heard about them before, and 3 children were sacrificed. The Dr. Roland Summit was called by the U.S. Attorney. He was consulted 10 months ago, but for all purposes now, the case has been dropped, and I believe the reason the case was dropped because they didn't want to get high up to Michael Aquino, who has so much power in the Pentagon and with the Defense Intelligence Agency and the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the Delta Force, that Gary Hambright might have testified and brought him into it. The children, plural, not just one little girl, evidently had said they were taken to his home in addition to the one that recognized him. Now, the 25th anniversary of John Kennedy's assassination is coming up in this 1988, and a lot of books will be out and articles, and the media is proceeding to, at every turn of the corner, to do something to defame John Kennedy's record. And now Kitty Kelly is writing a book with Judith Exner. She was on CNN this morning. There was an article about her by Liz Smith, February the 5th, 1988, in the San Francisco Chronicle. Judith Exner is dying of cancer, so she says she can tell the whole truth now. She was scared to death before, but she was one of the links of the President of the United States. She said on television, was quoted in the book that's coming out, that she took John Kennedy to see Sam Giancana, the Mafia boss, because he wanted help in winning the state of Virginia for elections. Now, most students of history know that Robert and John Kennedy fought the Mafia, and the purpose of this book, of course, is probably to leave a mini estate, maybe $1 million to her son that she mentioned before when she surfaced, when the House Select Committee was doing their work. When the investigation of John Kennedy's assassination was done again in Washington, the conclusion being a conspiracy, a lot of the people there said that the organized crime was behind the murder of John Kennedy, Sam Giancana, and John Rosselli. And these were the legal minds like G. Robert Blakey, who works with the Justice Department and was the chief counsel for the committee. And now they are trying to change the history of John Kennedy's life to say that he was asking Giancana to help him get votes to be elected. You can't have it both ways, but some people can, and so that's the story that will be going out about John Kennedy with Judith Exner, and of course she's dying, Giancana's dead, Kennedy's dead, and I just bring up just one more time, and as many times as it is applicable, at the time of Watergate, Howard Hunt was forging documents from the State Department, being paid $100 a day in those days to say that John Kennedy ordered the murder of Diem. Because the Watergate arrest, his desk was emptied out and these things were on the desk. This is part of the history of Watergate. So there's been a concerted effort going on. That was in 1972, June 72, that was happening, continuously going on with documents and papers that can be pulled out. And Judith Exner can say, I have records of where they stayed at a hotel and so forth. But E. Howard Hunt and Tony Lasowitz and Frank Sturgis and the CIA and the Defense Department can make any kind of papers they want, and none of us are going to fingerprint them or see, in fact, if these arrangements were made for John Kennedy to meet with Sam Giancana. I can't believe that people in the Secret Service haven't come forward all of these years, and 25 years, and said, oh, he used to go to Virginia to meet the Mafia chieftain from Illinois. But people remember what Kitty Kelly says in her books, so you can wait for this one to come out. One more disinformation lie coming out of the factory of lies of the United States. Just a couple of items I wanted to mention before I continue part two of what I was doing last week, because I believe that is very, very important. Ronald Reagan just signed a new request for a lot of money, billions of dollars, starting with $100 million, to get the space program going. And as the headlines read, such as the Los Angeles Times, new policy seeks to push private investment in space. And this is to open up space laboratories for scientists and for them to do medical research up there in space and belong to private industry. Now, the reason Robert Mayu was used for assassination teams by the FBI and CIA that he worked for was because he worked for Howard Hughes, which was a private company. And many private companies have been used for espionage because nobody can get in their books. There's no real board of directors to check on. And in the case of private companies running space stations, I'd like to refer to a book, Alternative 3. It was written by Leslie Watkins. I've had it on World Watchers a long time ago, numbers 380, 381, 384, 394, and so forth. It's about the plans for genocide of getting rid of 80% of the population in the world through NASA and through the space stations. And in addition to Alternative 3, some of you don't know or remember that Auschwitz was run by slave labor, and those that couldn't work were killed immediately. And they made rubber, substitute rubber and synthetic fuel for Adolf Hitler. And Auschwitz was owned by IG Farben, a private corporation that could have their factory at a location where millions of people, 10,000 a day, could be cremated, thrown into pits alive and so forth, run by a private company because IG Farben didn't account to anybody. Now, one of the people that I've mentioned on the program over and over again is Ryosha Sasakawa, described a long time ago in the Village Voice, October the 4th, 1983, as possibly one of the most dangerous war criminals, that he is not to be trusted. He will resurrect his fascism. After the war, he was part of the early group that killed political persons in Japan in order to get ready for Pearl Harbor, hopefully to control the world from the Japanese Asian side. He's part of the Japanese Mafia. He put up the money for Reverend Moon and for the World Anti-Communist League. Ryoshi Sasakawa got very interested in the space program. I had that also on World Watchers quite a while ago. And Ryoshi Sasakawa has a building or a department named for him in Houston, Texas, called the Sasakawa International Center for Space, because he gave them millions of dollars. And he also is donating millions of dollars to AIDS research. And so Sasakawa's interest in underwriting the Space Center, that was Program 812 last June 1987. He's 87 years old. He's donated $3 million to the Space Center in Houston. He's interested in space centers, stations, Mars and Moon, and he also travels around the country. He's donated $12 billion in charities and at least $8 million to the disease AIDS. And then I also did programs after the Challenger blew up about Judith Resnick, one of the women that was killed on the Challenger. That earlier she was on the shuttle Discovery, and she was doing research for the National Institute of Health on AIDS, and the space shuttles are used for AIDS experiments or whatever they're doing up there. They're working with the disease AIDS, and Sasakawa is interested in space. Auschwitz was a private company, and I think this going to privatization up there where nobody can get up to see what is going on is very, very serious. And then Wall Street Journal had an article just this last week on the company Warner Lambert going into AIDS-related drugs, U.S. To allow wider distribution, use of Warner Lambert AIDS-related drugs. That's the Wall Street Journal, the 17th of February. Well, Warner Lambert was the firm that Otto von Bolschwing joined up when he came to the United States. He was in the Gestapo, the Waffen-SS. He was hired by the OSS to merge those S's together, Allen Dulles and Wild Bill Donovan. And Warner Lambert hired Otto von Bolschwing, a man who really should have been put in the docket with Eichmann in Israel, but he was in California busy as the president of the TCI, Transcomputer International. And after working with Warner Lambert, he came out to California and became president of a company whose subsidiary was International Imaging. That is the home base of the enterprise of the Iran-Contra affair, with Albert Hakim buying International Imaging from the Otto von Bolschwing network, and General Secord and CIA Thomas Clines and CIA Theodore Shackley, and all the main operatives of the Iran-Contra affair are part of buying up the subsidiary and making it the Stanford Technology Training Group. And Otto von Bolschwing came to California after working for Elmer Bobst of Warner Lambert. Warner Lambert being the godfather of the Nixon career, who put him into power and then back into power when he lost to John Kennedy in 1960. And after the war, Wild Bill Donovan took over the American Cancer Society, and for the first time, instead of having a doctor there, they had a member of the OSS, Wild Bill Donovan, became a member of the board of the American Cancer Society, or chairman of it, so that Nazism, fascism, private companies, space for experimentations or medications or whatever, space books identifying genocide, problems in the future, all of this portends a very bad picture. I'm just citing a few references, and I did want to mention what is going on with regards to Reagan's project in space being given to private corporations, and the AIDS medicine with Warner Lambert, and the background of some of these characters who are duplicating the intent of what was to happen after World War II when the Odessa would take over. As a matter of fact, the Village Voice article on Ryoshi Sasakawa said that you have to question him, his loyalty. There's a fear of disloyalty, that he was a Class A war criminal, and that he appears to be a man potentially dangerous to our future, and he has been squarely behind the Japanese military policies of aggression, that he's not scrupulous, he's not to be trusted, and they warned about him wearing a new cloak that opportunity would offer, and Sasakawa funds the AIDS and the space program. The space is going private. They were doing AIDS research up there in the laboratories on the shuttles before. So, as I say, this is a very bad scene. Now, last week, I talked about a man who was murdered December 1986, Mr. Glenn Souham, and I want to continue part 2 of Souham because it touches bases with a lot of things that are happening with Edwin Meese, with the Costa Rica Iran-Contra people, with General Noriega in Panama, and put him again into a time slot of when he was murdered and probably why he was murdered, because the stories surrounding Mr. Souham's businesses are in the news very much today. And so I want to continue on the story about Souham. One story from the Washington Times, I shared a little bit of that with you last week, December 18th, said that his Paris-based security agency was included a wide circle of people in the jet set, and one of his good friends was Adnan Khashoggi, the Saudi Arabian financier who worked for Lockheed for our CIA earlier. He was entertaining Donna Rice on his yacht before she came home and was photographed with Gary Hart, who was the front contender for the Democratic Party a little while back. And Khashoggi has been a political animal for a long time. He was the first person contacted when the administration wanted to pay $10 million to Khomeini to get arms for Khomeini. Khashoggi was in on that deal with his friend Roy Furmark, and one of the close friends and business partners of Glenn Souham, who worked with the National Security Council, was in fact Adnan Khashoggi. And also these last week, I'm sure most of you couldn't have missed it, the article was in the Wall Street Journal, February the 16th. Noriega lawyer says files are political dynamite. Noriega files could affect the U.S. presidential campaign. CIA Director, Vice President George Bush, when he was CIA Director, worked closely with Noriega. And at the time of the hearings, when Milan Rodriguez was testifying, it was John Kerry who silenced him when he wanted to mention George Bush in connection with Noriega. Mr. Rodriguez already mentioned the connection of Gomez-Rodriguez, the other Rodriguez, in and out of George Bush's offices as vice president, as the drug connections got close to George Bush just previous to the New Hampshire primary. A senator who we learned to love and trust, John Kerry, didn't even let this very much out in the open. But this past week, Noriega's lawyers are saying that there's political dynamite if you want to go along with this candidate, George Bush, and if you want to pick on me. Now, January 29th, 1986 was another long article that I just referred to from the Wall Street Journal titled, Tongson Park Finds an Embattled Client, Panama's Noriega. And this article is about the closeness of Tongson Park. Now, he's a protege of Reverend Moon in Korea and of Ryosha Sasakawa from Japan, and he has inroads all over the world, Tongson Park, and he's very close with people from Japan in building up Panama so that they will have control of Panama when it goes back to the Panamanians in 9 years. And this article says that the former director of the Central Intelligence Agency, four-star Admiral Murphy, and I mentioned his name last week, went down to Panama with Thomas Hale Boggs and went to represent the National Security Council. He said it was as a private person, but he reported back to the government, and he was having consultations with Noriega. Having worked in the NSC right under George Bush as chief of staff to George Bush in the NSC, and having been a former deputy director of the CIA, he went down to Panama. He had 2 dates down there, 2 trips down there, August, November of 86 to Panama. And Glenn Souham was dead in December 86. And these gentlemen went down to Panama to talk. The person that went with them, Mr. Boggs, is the son, Thomas Hale Boggs, is the son of the late Hale Boggs, a member of Congress who was appointed on the Warren Commission, was there with Allen Dulles and John J. McCloy at the time of Watergate, and he was recognizing the connections of Watergate to the Kennedy assassination, just as I did the day they were arrested. He went on a journey, a plane, for whatever reason, over Alaska. The plane blew up, and Hale Boggs was never seen again. But his son is down here with Mr. Park, representing Tongson Park, representing as a private public relations man always, Mr. Sasakawa and Reverend Moon. And Mr. Boggs' mother is a U.S. House of Representatives Democrat, but he was down there along with Mr. Timmons, a Republican. They were all close together at Georgetown University, and they were talking with Noriega about whatever you can imagine. I believe it would have something to do those dates with Mr. Souham, and they allegedly were telling him, they went down, in 1987. Souham died December 86. But they went down to talk to Noriega and had conferences, and as I said before, the Moonies and the powers that be from that angle are protecting Noriega. They don't want to antagonize him because Japan and Korea, of course, would like to rebuild the Panama Canal. Now, a long article came out this past week by Alfonso Chardy, February the 7th, 1988. Pentagon official linked to Contra arms plans. And this, the highest in the Pentagon here, is Mr. Nestor Sanchez, a prominent person, Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Inter-American Affairs. And he worked with the arms dealers. David Duncan was one of them. And Dan Cummings, Colonel Dan Cummings, was the other one. And Sanchez from our Pentagon was working with regarding the shipment of weapons that went from Russia through Germany, the ship, the Pia Vesta case, that was to go down to the Contras filled with arms. It was carrying a lot of automatic rifles from Japan and shoulder anti-tank rockets and 32 four-wheel drive East German military trucks. Now, this shipment of weapons that came in on the Pia Vesta that involved our Defense Department agent staff, the Mr. Sanchez, and it involved in El Salvador, the Staff General Adolfo Blandon. He's different than the Blandon that testified from that worked with Noriega. But these people were involved in the shipment that Noriega kept in Panama because he ordered the ship to be held up that came from the Eastern Bloc, and that's the ship that Glenn Souham was sending from Europe. He had a hunk of money. He was never so wealthy as before, but he had a sense that he was going to be killed. He was in danger, he told a close friend. And the shipment of weapons that he arranged for, the Pia Vesta, was confiscated in Panama by Noriega. There were rumors circulating then that Noriega was on was involved with drug trafficking. The rumor may be true. I'm not saying it isn't true, but the public word out was get Noriega and start with his drug dealing. And he was mad, so he held up the ship that Glenn Souham had arranged and loaded up that went with the Eastern weapons and through Poland and Germany and the various briberies on down. Noriega was absolutely involved in that shipment and involved in the arranging of those weapons. As I say, was David Duncan, the arms dealer, and Colonel Dan Sanchez, Cummings, and Sanchez, very high up in our military. So the congressional probers were investigating this ship and how it got waylaid. It was supposed to go to Howard Air Force Base, the principal U.S. military base in Panama, and then the weapons were to go to El Salvador. So Noriega held up that ship that Souham had sent. So Souham was directly involved with these people, and there was a lot of consternation about that ship being in the hands of Noriega and not getting down to the Contras as quickly or as directly as they had wanted. Now, in the book, this book came out in September, called The Chronology. It's a very good book, and I'll be referring to it quite a bit. It's published by the National Security Archives in Washington, D.C. And in the chronology, and I just briefly mentioned last week, when they get to September 24th, 1986, they mentioned Glenn Souham, who was murdered in France. His murder was to silence him, they said. He worked with Oliver North and sent weapons to the Contras, and he was a consultant to the National Security Council, and he also did overseas work for the Overseas Private Investment Council, OPIC, that I mentioned last week. And then on the same, in the same chapter, at the end of this September period of 1986, continuing on down to September 26th, on the next page, there's a section about Roy Furmark. At the end of September 86, the same day or the day after Souham was murdered, Adnan Khashoggi sent Furmark, who was a client and partner of William Casey, to the CIA and wanted his help. He said that he was deeply involved in financing arms deals to Iran for the United States, that $10 million was owed to him from the account of Lake Resources, and that was being run, and still is run, by the Enterprise, the Stanford Technology Training Group. So Khashoggi, a friend of Souham, who's now dead by 2 days, a friend of his, is sending a message to the CIA, I want the $10 million that I put up for the arms for Iran, and Souham was taking that money and using money for buying weapons for the Contras. And Khashoggi was out the $10 million and found out it had been put in Lake Resources. And also, Souham was using the same bank in Switzerland. I ran through that quickly last week. Souham had 2 Swiss bank accounts, and one was deposited in the name of the same bank where Lake Resources was. Lake Resources used a dummy front stationed in Panama, where Noriega was, where the ship that Souham sent for the Contras was held up by Noriega. And the money, Souham's money, was in Lake Resources and that Udell company. Now, Udell was closed up in 1986 as a dummy front. It held for the Enterprise, Secord, Hakeem, Shackley, Clines, and so forth, because there was wind that there was narcotic money in the account. There was rumors, and there was also an open case being investigated after the Christic Institute filed their suit in Miami. By 1986, the Iran-Contra story was fully exposed just a few months before Eugene Hasenfuss landed in Nicaragua in his airplane. Now, the same chronology book has the details of the shipping project through Project Democracy, Udall Corporation, that was sending weapons to Panama through that company. And then in fall of 86, after Glenn Souham was murdered, and he was afraid he would be, on page 492, the chronology says, the attorneys for Thomas Cline, who's now on trial for security fraud, was told over the phone by a person representing himself as working for the National Security Council that Cline's is on assignment with the government. The attorney, A. Hoyt Rowell, says later, the person who was not a government official called him to tell Thomas Cline's repeated absences from the court proceedings would not interfere, that he would be working for the United States government. So as soon as Glenn Souham was murdered in Paris, Cline's was officially, he was retired from the CIA, and he worked with his whole team from the Enterprise and Stanford Technology Training Group for quite a few years, but now he officially was told, you're now working for the government. And his friend Theodore Shackley was working with the shipment of weapons from Poland to Portugal and then on down to Central America. And then the chronology also says that in the fall of 86, that the Drug Enforcement Agency stopped investigating the drug traffic in Guatemala that they were doing, that they had uncovered convincing evidence of American flight crews working with covert arms supply operations going to the Contras, involved in smuggling cocaine and marijuana. One of the crew members after the DEA agents searched their planes and so forth in their home in San Salvador for drugs, warned that he and his colleagues had White House protection and people shouldn't bother them searching for drugs. And they invoked Oliver North's name, although some officials later said the warning could have just been a bluff because, they wanted to cover up North's connection to the drugs as early as 86. And after Eugene Hasenfuss landed October 5th, the supply operation collapsed, but the crew members all broke up, and the drug investigation was no longer pursued. This was in the New York Times, January the 20th, 1987. So that as the heat got really hotter, they stopped the drug investigation, because if agents were on it, they would certainly come across the links of the drug traffic of El Salvador, Honduras, Guatemala, and Costa Rica, pouring millions and billions of cocaine into the United States through the Contra supply and through the kind efforts of our airplanes going down to help the Contras and bringing home the drugs. So that Mr. Souham was in the middle of a weapons deal. He was working with people with banking connections that were into the drug traffic. He was working with Mr. Khashoggi, who was missing $10 million. And with Mr. Noriega, was holding up the ship that he so kindly had sent down to the Contras. And he was really in multiple crossfire of people who were looking out for their own interests and really scared. As of October 1986, Hasenfuss landed, and then in November, the paper in Lebanon broke the story about the Iran weapons. And by December, I guess the powers that be decided that Glenn Souham couldn't exist any longer. He had made a lot of money in a short time, but he knew too many people in the White House with Ronald Reagan, and they decided it was time to get rid of him. And I'll do more about getting rid of him in a minute. We'll take a 1-minute break now, and I have announcements for you. So we'll get back to the first half of the program. This will now be the second half of broadcast number 846, and then we'll take calls, and then you can share your participation, and be on the air. Don't be bashful if you haven't done it before. Now, this Glenn Souham, who worked with the National Security Council and Oliver North and Adnan Khashoggi in the Eastern Intelligence Branch that provided weapons for the Contras, he worked for that company that I referred to, OPIC. And one of the hot points now is investigation of the Overseas Private Investment Corporation. That's what it is, OPIC, or the letters, Overseas Private Investment Corporation. And I mentioned before I had on World Watchers 830 back in September that a federal investigation was being made of OPIC because $375,000 and then $500,000 were given down to John Hall in Costa Rica, taken there by Robert Owen, being a liaison for the NSC. We don't know what he did with that money or who he transferred it to, or if it was used to buy drugs. It was allegedly to start a business, but his connections are with the intelligence community, and OPIC was giving him a nice round figure of $875,000, which is being investigated at the present time. And one of the workers from OPIC was at John Hall's ranch, and a lawyer went down and a worker, and one of them dropped dead in Costa Rica, never made it back home. So that was another victim to the OPIC scandal. Glenn Souham working for the agency. Also, Jonathan Whitney wrote an article about the John Hall connections in Costa Rica, Wall Street Journal, September 30th, 1987, and described the agency and the mortgages on Hill's property, that there was no collateral for such a loan, it hadn't been registered, that OPIC's lawyer absconded with the registration fees. He later, in quotes, committed suicide, and the Senate subcommittee will question OPIC evidently later on. I don't think they've done it yet. Now, that also is the same company that was doing the insurance for the pipeline that Ed Meese is involved in. The San Francisco Examiner had a story February the 15th, new views on memo regarding Meese. This is the pipeline that was to be built for Iraq. Another headline, NSC ran secret effort on pipeline. That's the San Jose Mercury, February the 4th. But the article from the Los Angeles papers and San Francisco Examiner, in sort of the headline before the article begins, said, source calls language clearly conspiratorial. Now, the word conspiratorial is a new word to see, referring to Ed Meese's actions or the pipeline or the National Security Council. Years ago, for maybe 15 of my 17 years on the air, people referred to me as a conspiracy theorist. Now they come out and talk about conspiracies in Edwin Meese and letters and memos that are conspiratorial. And another story in the Chronicle, bombshell memo to Meese. And again, the word conspiratorial is used. The language is unanimously considered by the persons who read it, the letter conspiratorial. And these were arrangements and payments loaded with potentially damaging inferences in the memos regarding building the pipeline. And the company that was to insure the pipeline was the same OPIC that was giving this $875,000 to John Hall in Costa Rica and working with Glenn Souham. He was an agent for them also. And the story about this pipeline that again brings on the tone of the secret team that was described at the conclusion of the Iran-Contra hearings suggests and says that the activities of building the pipeline for Iraq were limited between Edwin Meese and Mr. Wallach, Meese's close friend and attorney, Robert Wallach, and Mr. Rappaport, the financier, Bruce Rappaport from Switzerland, and Robert McFarlane. And the orders were that it was to be compartmentalized, that the CIA and the State Department weren't even to know about the pipeline project. The OPIC would put together, and the State Department was specifically not informed of the operation, nor was the CIA. The activities were on the behalf of Edwin Meese, his close friend and attorney, E. Robert Wallach, a long friend, Wallach working with the Bechtel Corporation and Bruce Rappaport. Now, I came across an article this week that Bruce Rappaport, the mysterious banker for OPIC, happens to have an insurance agency that represents overseas all of the Soviet Union Navy, if you can dig that one. So these secret activities are going on without the CIA or State Department knowing it, being held in the financial accounts of Mr. Rappaport in charge of the overseas Soviet Union Navy. And goodness knows what kind of deals or compromises were taking place. And the meetings were happening in Washington. In June 1985, in the White House, the NAC section of the White House, these people were meeting. And one day after their meetings, according to the book on the chronology, Robert McFarlane then leaves, or 2 days later, to go to Iran and is making deals to send arms to Iran. He's sitting in the White House in the NSC building, deciding to build pipelines for Iraq, and the next day he's off with Ollie north to Iran. He is helping the oil from one country, and he is promising arms to Iran, the other country. Somehow they can't seem to make peace over the table or over the board, but they have to have these secret dealings where they're undermining each other. Now, as far as Mr. Glenn Souham is concerned and the ships that he had that were sent down to Panama that Noriega had, I mentioned quickly last week, and I want to repeat again because of the links of the late Souham and with Noriega's new problems, an article that was in the New York Times, November the 19th, 1987, called Panamanian Reportedly Offered Sabotage for North's National Security Council. Panamanian General Manuel Antonio Noriega offered to assist Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North, the White House aide, with sabotage or to do assassinations for the United States. North accepted the sabotage offer on the instructions of Rear Admiral John Poindexter, but Poindexter told North, "Don't get too involved. The U.S. government is prohibited by executive order of planning or conducting plans and assassinations." However, Poindexter apparently decided to run the sabotage operations outside normal government channels, so he ordered North to pay for sabotage out of the money controlled by the Enterprise, which held profits from the Iran arms sales. Now, the Enterprise kept the money that Khashoggi was supposed to be paid back. It went into that account, which Souham shared the same bank and which the Enterprise, Stanford Technology Training Group, used. And as soon as Souham was killed in September of '86, Thomas Cline, a member of this group, is hired by the National Security, begins to work for the government officially. And so the money came out of places like Lake Resources, banks in common with the late Souham, and there was an agreement about assassinations and the way to get around whatever slim laws were made by Ronald Reagan or William Casey. And so assassination was one of their projects, and one of the members on the team, Cline's, was hired by the White House right after Souham was murdered. Theodore Shackley and Thomas Cline were in Chile when Salvador Allende was murdered. They were good at that. They were in Saigon at the time of the Phoenix program, where 30 or 40,000 people were murdered. But they were two CIA agents in Chile at the time that government was overthrown. Now, February 18th, 1988, the Boston Globe had a story. Casey derailed any ban on killings. This is the testimony of Mark M. Richard, Deputy Assistant Attorney General, and the House Committee is still working on the Iran-Contra story. And he said William Casey, a CIA director, scrapped a proposal that was made in 1984 that would be a crime for people in the United States to plot the murder of individuals in foreign countries. And Mr. Richards was disturbed by the proposal, the way it was being handled or rewritten. He said, "My recollection is that William Casey wanted to be assured that this proposal could not reach authorized conduct of the agency, that they would be able to kill and the CIA's hands wouldn't be tied. Federal employees, including the CIA, had originally been prohibited from taking part in foreign assassinations in 1981. However, Reagan's order didn't have criminal sanctions, and so therefore you could kill agents of their own that they worked with overseas." And the Associate Attorney General Lowell Jensen assured William Casey that the proposal to put a ban on killings, assassinations, wouldn't happen, wouldn't affect any acts, that had been authorized by the National Security Council, the government, and shortly after that, Associate Attorney General Lowell Jensen was made a judge, a federal judge in San Francisco, and he's holding up a very important case. I think it's regarding Mr. Maselli, a top Nazi of the Nazi junta that were responsible for 20 or 30,000 people being killed in Argentina, and he's holding up the case of the trial that's supposed to take place in this country from people whose parents died or family died at the death squads in Argentina. And Lowell Jensen is sitting on that case in San Francisco. It'll probably get the same treatment that the Presidio Daycare Center got. So Jensen was in on assuring William Casey on the legality of murder, so I don't believe it was very impossible to get rid of Glenn Souham because of his touching all these various bases and being replaced by Thomas Cline's and the paperwork, the legality of the assassinations, and Noriega offering to do assassinations. That doesn't mean he leaves Panama and takes a trip to Paris. It means that there's a lot of Panamanians that can get to Paris and gun down Mr. Souham. The two people that gunned him down have never been found. Now, just the first of the year, the first broadcast in January of '88 on tape 840, I had a tongue-in-cheek account of Mr. Attorney General Edwin Meese making a quick trip to Paris, France, to pick up 9 paintings of Adnan Khashoggi that belonged to the Marcoses that Corazon Aquino wants back in the Philippines. I know that South Beach and the various art galleries don't have attorney generals flying around picking up those paintings. There's ways to ship those with federal marshals and so forth. The artwork worth many, many millions more is transported. And the attorney general slipped off real quietly and came back fast the first day of this year to go to Paris to arrange with Mr. Adnan Khashoggi to pick up 9 paintings. There were 38 altogether, so they were giving him 9 to send home. That means he can make a lot of trips to Paris to pick up paintings, and then he can be doing his bag work or his money arranging or payoffs. The attorney general made this quick trip to Paris. It was a quick trick. That's what I really meant to say, and a tricky trip, and then allegedly brought home 9 pictures, and I asked at the time about what kind of monkey business was this, and sure, the Philippines want their pictures. He didn't bring home as many as he was supposed to, but I thought he was on some kind of a deal, and with Mr. Khashoggi being close to Souham, Khashoggi wanting his money and asking for it 2 days after Souham was dead, Souham handling a ton of money for the enterprise that belonged to Adnan Khashoggi, and there was Khashoggi in and out of Paris all the time, and Souham thinking he had tons of money, millions of dollars that really weren't his, were to be paid back to Khashoggi. He's a friend of Khashoggi's, and all of a sudden our Attorney General is flying to Paris to bring home these pictures, and all you have to do is think about what was going on in Paris when he flew there. The OPIC office was being investigated with Meese and the pipeline starting the first of this year. The OPIC funding of John Hall's ranch with his hunks of money, $875,000, was being investigated, is being investigated in Washington. The French police are still working on the case of the Glenn Souham murder because they found papers of the State Department there. Mr. Khashoggi, his associate, is crying for his $10 million that he doesn't have that was put into the lake resources. And Mr. Souham's Swiss account was in the same branch as Lake Resources, and the arms and the weapons going down to the Contras from Poland and Eastern Europe came through Lake Resources, Udall, that dummy front. And so all these investigations are going on by various groups of Congress, various law enforcement people, and they're beginning to talk about the drugs of Noriega and the investigation of drugs. And, of course, that goes right back to the Contras. So with all of this just coming to a head by January the 1st, 1988, this is only February, and I've been collecting articles on these stories. As the investigations were going, I can see and just practically hear the conversation that Ed Meese was having in Paris. I suspected something very fishy about that trip when he went, but now when I put all the dates together and what was coming down at the time, I really wonder how the man can sleep at night. Now, last week I just quoted a few sentences of a Mr. Milan Rodriguez who was testifying on C-SPAN. It was played back, the Senate hearings on drug connections of Noriega. And the man who puts him down in the news media, the Washington Post, the Miami Herald, is U.S. Attorney Leon Kellner. He says he doesn't trust Rodriguez. Rodriguez wanted to mention George Bush's connections. Again, at the hearings, as I say, and John Kerry cut it off. He has talked before and given interviews on the Mr. Gomez-Rodriguez, a man with the same names, one's an alias, who has access to George Bush's office and was there twice. And the drug enforcement agents, some believe Mr. Rodriguez's story. A lot believe that he's absolutely truthful. He worked with the Central Intelligence Agency. He funded the original Bay of Pigs. He learned out the funding through the Bay of Pigs operators. He launders money for drug smugglers. He's an accountant in Miami. But the man who puts him down the most in the printed media is this prosecutor Kellner from Miami, who said that Millian never told his staff about these allegations, that his office has no documentary evidence, that Milan was a money launderer. Well, Milan Rodriguez testified that when the DEA came into his office, they ripped out the whole computer and destroyed all the evidence. And you can see why in Miami they would be doing that. And he said there was no evidence that he worked for Medellin drug cartel. Well, you're not a card-carrying member of the Medellin drug cartel. But the U.S. Attorney Leon Kellner from Miami, who's putting down Rodriguez, who sounds perfectly believable and has horrendous stories to tell, that's the same Kellner that was stopping the drug investigations when the Christic Institute filed their suit and when they went into Hassan Fous's landing and the arms and weapons to Iran and down to the Contras. The drug trafficking, the gun running came out in many, many articles. And the same man, Mr. Kellner, the U.S. Attorney, had stopped the investigation in Miami on the basis of it's too political. He saw Oliver North's name on those papers, and he stopped the investigations. And there were large articles this past week, again, the San Jose Mercury and Boston Globe, how the probe of the North Network was diverted. And it tells about the U.S. Attorney, Mr. Kellner, the Office of Kellner and the Justice Department and the other agencies who blocked the probe, that Kellner reversed the recommendations of the FBI and the Assistant U.S. Attorney that the case could go to a federal grand jury, and he did so without informing anybody doing the investigations. And there were other persons, U.S. Attorney Jeffrey Feldman and an FBI agent, Kevin Currier, who said that their recommendations for the grand jury were being stopped by Kellner, and Kellner stopped the investigations because he met personally with Edwin Meese and Oliver North, and he was told this was political, and an agent from the Central Intelligence Agency leaked to members of North's secret network the information that was coming about was the one FBI agent and one attorney. Mr. Feldman went to Costa Rica, and there were people taking the notes, a mole inside the offices, of course, of Senator John Kerry, and they were tipped off of what was happening in the investigations. And Kellner was the very person who was stopping those investigations until they couldn't be stopped any longer. And the whole Oliver North network could have been exposed as soon as the Christic Institute filed their case. And it was this man who now puts down Mr. Rodriguez, who obviously is protecting George Bush and George Bush's drug-running activities as well as anything else, U.S. Attorney Kellner. So watch Ronald Reagan make him a federal judge in Miami shortly, because he's been keeping his fingers in the dikes, and they're getting awfully soggy. Another large articles in the Miami Herald and the L.A. Times, February the 13th, titled U.S. Aids Link Honduran Military Chief in Drug Traffic. And this says Honduras, the powerful military general Humberto Regalado Hernandez, is suspected of protecting Colombia drug traffickers and using his country for shipping cocaine into the United States. He's the head of a Honduran army force that has been regularly sending drugs into this country. 8,000 pounds of cocaine were confiscated in Florida last November. That's $1.4 billion in one shipment, traced to the Honduras. And Mr. Jorge Osha, a defendant in the Christic Institute, was driving a Porsche belonging to one of the Honduran officers, attaché of the Honduran military team, when he was arrested in Colombia, and then he was released. He's a defendant, but I doubt if he'll come to Miami to stand trial with the Christic suit. And Honduras has been a major league drug dealer. It parallels the case of Miami. This comes out of the Miami Herald. It parallels the case out of Panama, rather. And this is a long article on Honduran military chief and drug trade. And next week or in a few weeks, I'll go into, and I promise, the links of Oliver North to one of the top officials of Honduras and a large drug dealer. He's in jail in Florida he had $10 million in narcotics money to pay somebody to kill the current president of Honduras, just as we're trying to get rid of Noriega. And the name of the game is keep the monopoly on the drug traffic, and if somebody's prices are too high, get rid of them and off them. Now, Miami Herald had another long article. General Gorman, and he's no flaming liberal, retired General Paul Gorman, the former commander of the U.S. Army Southern Command, said Monday that an excessive preoccupation with Soviet expansionism has kept the Reagan administration from carrying out the full-fledged fight against international drug smugglers. This is Miami Herald, February the 7th, 1988. The title, General says U.S. ignored Noriega and drugs and the massive drug trafficking. And again, the Honduras parallels it. The former Southern commander said he repeatedly urged the Department of Defense to pay more attention to the rising power of drug cartels in the region. And the Deputy Director of Defense under Carlucci now is Richard Armitage, who was named by Kung Sa and the persons in Burma as being high-up partner in the drug traffic. The Defense Department Deputy Director Armitage can't be touched any more than Michael Aquino can be touched with the Presidio case. And General Gorman is saying that the high-ranking officials in the military are involved with this activity. He said, I happen to believe that many of the threats to our security arise from factors over which the Soviets exert very little control, Gorman said. And he said Noriega was described by U.S. officials as a longtime CIA collaborator. Many legislatures suspect that the Reagan administration failed to move against Noriega until recently because senior CIA and national security officials were receiving help from the Panamanian general, and the general in return was supplying Nicaragua Contra rebels. Gorman said he was unaware of the efforts of Oliver North to enlist Noriega in a secret plan, shipping weapons from Panama to El Salvador. These people work on a need to know, and as I said before, the pipeline matter was not to be told to the State Department or the CIA. But he goes on in this long article and tells about Eastern Airlines and pilot Gerald Loeb telling about traveling narcotics between Miami and Panama Eastern Airlines. And Mr. Borman, one of the prominent astronauts, was the president of Eastern Airlines when it was up to his ears in narcotics traffic. And so we give these people some hollow expectations, just as the type of Jimmy Swaggers get from the religious followers. And yet the airline that Mr. Borman ran, Eastern Airlines, was notoriously linked to drug traffic. And the pilots talk about the drug traffic pouring into the United States. And as I say, a long article in the Boston Globe and then the San Jose Mercury on how the probe of Oliver North, the network, was divided up. And a nice article in San Francisco Chronicle, prosecutor who found North's secrets. And once in a while there are some good people who do find the secrets. And this story is February the 20th, 1988. A young prosecutor in Miami stumbled onto Oliver North's secret Nicaraguan arms supply network 8 months before it burst into public view. He was stymied by his superiors when he tried to get the case to the grand jury. Jeffrey Feldman, an assistant U.S. attorney, said that he had a sketchy view of the plans to murder U.S. ambassador in Costa Rica, Louis Tams. And when he read that, he turned white. And when he saw North's name at the top of the chart, heading the supply operation. And this, of course, his awareness and education began when the Christic Institute suit was filed. And he and two FBI people went to Costa Rica, and he said, I was treated like an enemy when I talked about that. And he showed his information to Ambassador Louis Tams, a key link in North's network. We all thought we were onto something, said Kevin Currier, one of the FBI agents, throughout the spring and summer of 1986. Feldman asked his boss, U.S. Attorney Leon Kellner, in Miami to allow the case to go. But Feldman, who at the time did not realize the full significance of what he discovered, said he was stalled for months by Kellner and other top assistants. Feldman said he was told by Kellner August 29th that politics are involved. That was in August 29th, and then October the 5th, when Hassan was landed and mentioned Gomez Rodriguez and Bush's office. That's when the case blew open, but they were sitting on it, and this is a windfall for the Christic Institute. In the last 3 weeks, there's been enough material to assure that they're going to win their lawsuit for the drug trafficking, the assassination plots, and so forth. There are enough people coming forward now and telling how the original investigation was stopped. He said that when he went to Costa Rica and went to see Bob Hall, an American whose farm was used for the Contras, the ambassador himself turned white. They were all turning white down there. And Feldman said the only thing, he said, when I pulled out the chart of how the operation goes was get Fernandez. Joe Fernandez, then a CIA station chief in Costa Rica, knew that he was dealing with three people, Feldman and two FBI agents who had only seen the top of the iceberg, that he knew what was going on, and they tried to rip the credibility of the people who were there. Fernandez said to the U.S. attorney, deputy attorney, do you know who Oliver North is? Let me tell you who Oliver North is. He's the person that introduced me to the President of the United States last week, the CIA station chief down in Costa Rica. And immediately after the meeting with Tams on March 31st, Fernandez called North to tell him that the FBI were in Costa Rica and they were asking questions about the weapons network. And Feldman revealed that Hall called him in Costa Rica and said he wanted to give the prosecutor information, but 2 days later Hall then changed his mind. And then they all sat on the material, and the rest is history. Well, that is the story of these drug dealers, and there will be a lot more coming out. Unfortunately, there's not a lot in our papers, but I do take enough papers to get these and share them with you. And I'll continue doing that because this story will be unfolding for a long, long time. I want to conclude the program by saying the previous hour of World Watchers has been made possible in part by Aries Arts in the heart of Capitola Village, serving Santa Cruz's growing consciousness for over 20 years. My name is Mae Brussell, and I'll be back with you in about 3 minutes to continue the second part of World Watchers.